Today we'll be reading from Valve's book of playtesting horrors yet again, and seeing how they change various games, from Half-Life to Portal to Left 4 Dead. I'm Lenify, and this is my pet hamster, Laszlo. Oh! If you haven't seen the first part of this mini-series yet, I implore you to go back and watch the first one and then return. Trust me, it's worth it. Link's up there. And if this gets, let's say, 25,000 views, I'll do another playtesting video. Now remember, I'm not here to dunk on any of the playtesters. They are a very important part of the development process. But I'll also be talking about how playtesting can go horribly wrong if you're not careful towards the end. And I'll probably make a whole video on that too, so if you're interested, come along for the ride and subscribe. It's time to meet the collector. This is one of my favorite yet. I thought the Maze Runner from the first playtesting video was bad, but this guy just takes the cake. A commenter kindly left this one as a suggestion, and it's made its way here, so thank you, anonymous commenter. Sometimes a playtester's issue is so nonsensical that even Valve struggles to change the game for them, which will come as a relief to all you commenters who felt Valve has been simply appealing to the lowest common denominator and leaving us with this shallow product. So let's set the scene. Lights, camera, dumbass. This special one-of-a-kind moron got stuck at a door over here in the plaza in point insertion, where, you know, there isn't any sort of challenge. And his solution was so nonsensical that it didn't even exist within the confines of the game. So first of all, right, this door clearly can't be open. I feel like that's obvious. So let's say we did get stuck here, you or I might assess the area, check that the door is openable, and probably move on. But this guy decided to start rummaging through the game's controls, like for a depressingly long time. So what happened? I mean, maybe someone accidentally unbound the use key or something, and he was looking for that. What do you reckon? Well, fortunately, Valve actually asked. They were like, hey man, we're a bit concerned here. What are you doing? Because this has gone on for long enough. Yeah, nah, he was looking for the inventory key. You know, viewers, the famous Valve inventory key. He really thought he could open this already inaccessible door with one of the physics objects he'd picked up earlier on and stored in his inventory. What inventory, man? At first, this made absolutely zero sense to anyone, but after much investigation, it turned out that this guy thought that every time he picked an item up and then pressed E again to, you know, drop it, that it was going into his inventory. So each item this fella had ever picked up from the very start of the chapter, he thought he was stowing it away like some sort of Gordon clause with a big bag of crap. The only way I can imagine this making sense is if he thought that Gordon, not having his HEV suit, was able to sort of pull his pants forward to make a sort of pelican-style pocket like some sort of amateur shoplifter from Coventry. Fortunately for this guy, on some level it actually did make sense. You see, Valve admits that some of the games around that time did display inventory storage as sort of dropping something. I can't for the life of me figure out why, and even then did you not hear the item bouncing off the floor? Is the sound of an item hitting the floor a typical way to tell your player that they've stored something in their inventory? I think not. On no level does this make a lick of sense to me. I'm not even trying to insult the guy here, but he must have had some sort of audio issue, be it on the computer or with himself. It's known to happen. Anyway, in a move I'm sure everyone will be happy to hear, particularly those of you who were perhaps justifiably quite mad at Valve's actions in the last video. While Valve did still generously consider what they could change to stop this from happening with other potential geniuses, as you may expect, this one playtester was the only playtester that had this issue. So thankfully, Valve made the correct call and decided there is no way this will ever happen again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I dread to think what Valve might have tried to do to quote-unquote fix this issue, so let's move on before I start getting ideas, and head over to Sand Traps, where there is at least some sort of threat. Our next playtester story is not quite as infuriating as the last one, but it sure is interesting, and still pretty damn funny. So you know how it is. Sometimes you park your dearly beloved Ford Focus in a shed and it gets taken to the Shadow Realm by a large enemy crab, most likely on its way to an intergalactic pawn shop where crabs from all over the galaxy will bid ironically and make fun of such primitive human technology. Yes, supposedly these are all the rage on puny Earth. Renowned human rapper Uno Miles even wrote a hip-hop song about the eponymous vehicle. Rather humorous, wouldn't you agree? And this is one of those times. Very relatable, sure. But did you ever think that it was kind of funny that after everything you and the scout car have been through, and what a tough time the Combine had with it, you end up parking it in this spacious British real estate, and it simply gets spitefully swiped by a swooping dropship? Well, firstly, it might not surprise you to find out that this section was, of course, very different before playtesting. But on the way to their destination, Valve found a couple of very interesting things about the playtesters and their behavior when testing the scout car. Diagnosis: an unhealthy obsession with the damn thing. The scout car is truly the opium of the masses. Yes, this might not come as a shock, But because of the general fun of having a pretty responsive vehicle at the time that Half-Life 2 was being developed, and of course not to mention the protection it offered from the constant onslaught of bugs, Valve found that players got really attached to it. I mean really attached. The same way you might get attached to a car in a proper driving game like, I don't know, Need for Speed or something. And then when you get the 3 strikes, it's like losing a loved one. And this had the unintended side effect of leading quite a lot of playtesters to just relentlessly pursue the buggy. Like forever. Like It Follows, but Scout Car. And this is really similar to the way people would relentlessly try and climb and stack objects in the first video. It's the kind of obsession where the developer has to step in and take action. Valve says in the developer commentary, if players thought there was even the smallest chance they'd be reunited with the vehicle, they'd give it a shot, again and again. This created a really distracting disconnect between the players' expectations and what Valve was kind of expecting them to do. And of course it really screwed with the pacing. But how could it have been so bad? This part here where you leave the buggy behind is different in 2 major ways. First of all, no luxury London flat to park it in, and secondly, no giant enemy crab. Playtesters could easily assume that this is another one of those moments where you get out the buggy, go investigate some sort of creepy house or some very cool visual storytelling, grab some loot, pop back in, and away you go. But this was not one of those times. So Valve added the shack to sort of say, come on bro, it's over, let it go, come on. No more vehicles until episode 2. But that's kind of the key difference between the playtesters here and those from the last video. While if this was just one person's problem, we could laugh at them until they cried and then drink up the tears. And don't lie, I've seen some of those comments. Since it actually seemed to bamboozle quite a few people, it was probably just genuinely a bit unclear at first. While we obviously don't want a world of yellow arrows and whatnot, we shouldn't forget that there is a halfway point between leaving the player hopelessly lost and telling them exactly what to do, where you kind of just have, you know, good design. Kind of like how Valve often puts lights above places you're supposed to go to progress, and most players don't even think about it. At any rate, I don't find it distracting one bit. BioShock, on the other hand, a game that is often hailed as one of the greatest in the genre, something I really agree with actually, literally guides you with an arrow. Granted, you can turn it off. By the way, if you like BioShock as well as other Valve games, definitely stick with me for more of both coming very soon. So we've got the shed. What about the dropship? Originally, I actually thought the dropship was there to really cement the fact that the car's gone, so you can't have any confusion. But after they added the shed, they actually added the dropship to take the scout car away, purely as emotional impact. Because Valve found that when the Combine stole the buggy in playtests, players were absolutely crashing out, going positively bonkers, yeah? And they took this as a sign that they'd crafted a really good scene. It's much better and more impactful than simply leaving it in the shed, in my opinion. Bravo, Gaben. Hey, wise guy. If you're a dropship, why would you drop my car? Yeah, see? Also, again, according to the developer commentary, this guy up here, sneaky bastard, is literally only there so you look up and trigger a look target. And for those of you who don't know, think of it as kind of like a button that you press by simply looking at it, which then triggers the dropship to fly off overhead with your beloved scout car. They literally just wanted to hurt the player. It's genius! Another thing I never see people bring up is that it could also kind of imply that just as Gordon slips away, yet another resistance outpost is gone to the dogs. Or I guess the crabs. Gone to the crabs. I really don't dislike this change at all. Nothing is really taken away from you. Except for the scout car, but it's funny as hell. Yoink. The Combine have had enough of your shit. But speaking of the scout car, I got some more interesting info on the subject of playtesters. The scout car's iconic stripped down design was not just a choice for coolness. It ended up actually looking like this because the more Valve obscured the world from the driver's seat with the body of the buggy, the more playtesters would seriously start to struggle with motion sickness. And apparently this included plenty of FPS veterans, people you really would not expect to be getting motion sickness from an FPS. I mean, how bad must that have been? Here's a fan-made impression of an older version of the scout car, and as you can see, you would see a lot less of the world if you were hooning around in this thing. It's a shame really, because I think it looks cool as hell. But let's save the vomiting for Half-Life 3's most likely gut-wrenching ending, shall we? But I do find this kind of ironic, given one of the first things they do when they put you in the driver's seat of this thing is drop you upside down, surrounded by enemies. And if the Combine hadn't have drained the oceans here, you definitely would have been getting seasick. So guys, the Combine isn't all bad. Don't judge them so much. I'm personally blessed to have never had motion sickness at all, except for my first couple of weeks in VR, and I wonder if this would have been so bad that it made me motion sick as well. If any of you guys struggle with motion sickness, I can arrange to come over and sort of take your car apart until it's no longer an issue, free of charge. While Valve were figuring out what to do in Half-Life 2 with NPC interactions and those scripted sequences, they needed to do a lot of little tweaks to ensure they felt immersive, natural, and not too boring. One of these tweaks is pretty simple, but very smart. So similarly to how Matt Groening/Graining spent a long ass time booting Marge Simpson down the road in Hit and Run, like he thinks he's my dad or something, Valve knew that if they made it too much fun to attack or generally mess with the NPCs in a scripted sequence, it would kind of encourage the player to mess around even more. This could completely destroy any immersive sequence they were trying to put together. You see, Valve always tried to put a lot of importance in the player actually taking something, be it world building, story, or simply a bit of interest from these scripted sequences. So they could not have this happening. And even still, there are people that play Half-Life 2 and genuinely think there is no story. The mind boggles. So basically, Valve set out to reward the behavior that they wanted to see more of, and not necessarily disincentivize, but flatly not react to the behavior they didn't want, to make it as boring as possible to do the wrong thing. Because in situations like these, even negative reinforcement can be seen as a reward to certain types of players. So every now and then, some absolute specimen of a playtester would try and knock off someone's glasses or something. And Ariel Diaz says that they wanted to make it so that messing around with various knickknacks in Eli or Kleiner's lab prompted the characters to react realistically so the player would think they were actually there looking at some stuff, all of which might have a backstory. And they get the impression that they are rooted in the scene. The other characters are there chatting to them. Much better than just watching an NPC puppet show. The combination of this with the cold shoulder they gave players who did the wrong thing had great results. But one smart ass that really underscored the need for this work spent a really long time just standing there and hitting Dr. Kleiner over and over in the head with a box of all things. And this, of course, cemented the idea at Valve that we could not at any level make it fun or interesting to interrupt the sequence. Well, you might think it's a bit weird that Kleiner doesn't stop and say, "Ouch, Gordon, my bones! I command you to stop at once. I have osteoporosis." It's far better this way, trust me. I think the closest thing Valve has done to having a decently long "Hey player, stop dicking around" sequence is when you can piss off the door voice in Half-Life 1. Immediately. There's always that one player who really tries to push the envelope, and as a game developer, it's your job to kick that miserable bastard to the curb and disappoint them. Just kidding. Within reason. Now you might say, but Greenify, you can absolutely ramshackle the scientist in Half-Life 1 with a variety of inventive methods. But clearly, in that game, the story and the execution of the game called for a completely different type of character interaction. Most of the scientists in Half-Life 1 were not essential, and there weren't really scripted sequences, at least not super often, in the same way as Half-Life 2. If you did kill someone who had something really important to say, and you couldn't hurt or kill them without causing some sort of Doctor Who-style time event, the game would just end and say, "Fuck you, love Gaben." Which again is not that immersive, is it? Speaking of which, let's talk about Portal and GLaDOS. GLaDOS is, just by herself, absolutely perfect. She's the glue that holds Portal together, and she hasn't even forced me to say that under threat. But you might be surprised to learn that she wasn't really an early consideration at all, which is absolutely insane to me because I just feel like I can't imagine a game without her, and apparently neither could the playtesters. Also, as a little bonus for this section, there was another time where playtesters hated GLaDOS so much that they had to change her character lines, which, given what we know about GLaDOS, seems like a very stupid idea, but we'll go over it soon and see if it has any merit. According to a Games Radar article I found, when playtesters first played Portal, they actually thought they were playing some sort of demo. In an interview with Tech Radar, resident Aussie Robin Walker said playtesters would still always have a blast with the mechanics and the portals and all that, but Valve kept getting the same feedback. Hey, when does the game start? A dark cloud rolled over Valve, and all Robin could really say was, "Man, this is the game?" And I imagine that must have felt like a real gut punch, especially with how hard it must have been to get a game like Portal to even work in the first place. And this triggered a brain blast within Valve. They raced to figure out what it was that made this experience feel more like a long demo rather than a seriously fleshed out Valve masterpiece. What are the differences between those two outcomes? They settled on a few strong observations of what it is a player needs to feel like they're actually going on a journey and not just completing a list of tasks, bouncing off the walls of a disconnected series of white rooms. And while the ideas they came up with are kinda obvious in hindsight and appear in many of the games we know and love, I think it's good to go over them. Above all else, the player needed a reason to continue. It's all well and good incentivizing moving forward with more play, but if there's not something huge, some underlying quest to propel the player forward, then it very well may feel like a shallower experience than it really is. And yeah, in the retail version of Portal, you do get the sense that you're getting to the core of some sort of mystery as everything unravels and you get closer and closer to GLaDOS. And speaking of, there needs to be an antagonist that genuinely feels like they want to stop you, that they could push you back. It's not just smooth sailing through a bunch of puzzles. And last but certainly not least, there has to be a sense of genuine threat, that if you mess up, something bad will happen. And losing progress is the most mundane way of going about this, but with the addition of GLaDOS, you also get the feeling that your journey will all be for nothing if you give up now, or if you can't get past a part, and it keeps you wanting to get to the next level. Then of course you have turrets, neurotoxin, rocket turrets, and all of this stuff, and it is all just far more interesting. And bam, we got our favorite robotic representation of a narcissistic mother figure. Bravo, Valve. GLaDOS as both an antagonist and as an individual is hugely compelling, but a gigantic part of the game's atmosphere. She makes you feel like a puny rat inside a huge maze, like a real test subject. And of course, adding GLaDOS also meant adding the cake plot, and that amazing shell-size oven that's really fun to escape from. The escalation, the bit where you get to go behind the scenes. This is peak gaming. Not to even mention the companion cube. How the hell would that work without GLaDOS? So as much as it sounds kind of dumb that they didn't realize that the game had started, I can't place 100% of the blame on the playtesters here. And I also don't want to be harsh on Valve either, because they really pulled it out of the bag. So now let's move on to that time GLaDOS was too mean for playtesters. According to an article written by Leedsy, GLaDOS had to be changed in Portal 2 because pretty much everyone was unhappy with her. Originally, after her miraculous resurrection, she was such a reprehensible asshole that playtesters actively disliked her enough to try and leave her behind in Act 2. They were actively not enjoying the game and did not like its direction because they hated this version of GLaDOS so much. And at first I thought, how sensitive have you got to be tilted by a known shit-talker NPC, you know, doing its thing? But then I found out that Ellen McLean was also similarly pretty unhappy with her lines. She was a bit uncomfortable and a bit concerned. You can find some of these cut lines online, including a really weird Garfield tangent, yes really, and a few lines about killing or otherwise maiming you in a bunch of creative and sinister ways. I don't think all of the cut lines are available, but those are the ones I was able to find. But both the writer of this article and I have similar feelings. I think it makes a lot of sense that GLaDOS would be at peak despicable mode after we tried to kill her. Though don't get me wrong, I can see why people might have thought that GLaDOS being passive-aggressive was just more fun, and at the end of the day, that's what a game is about. But if you pay attention to the lyrics of Still Alive, she says, "I'm not even angry. I'm being so sincere right now." Gotta learn to listen, Lou. Overall, I still love what they did in Portal 2, even if at times I think it borders on a bit Disney Pixar, and although I probably would have preferred Mega Bitch GLaDOS instead of what we got, I still think that game is at least a 9 out of 10. Now, it's time for Left 4 Dead. This one is short, sweet, and stupid. Every now and then Valve proves with their playtesting that they are indeed not perfect. The ladder incident is one of those times. Once again, allow me to mention the fact that Left 4 Dead was seriously painful to make for Valve. People didn't want to work on it, and people didn't want to play it. Of course, it ended up being a banger, but they did not know this during development. So when they were testing Left 4 Dead, one of the biggest hiccups Valve ran into was that when they changed a certain texture to another texture, and that texture happened to be behind a pretty important ladder, this turned out to be a complete disaster for everyone involved. Now, I'm not sure what texture they changed it to or from, but whatever it was, it made the ladder so hard to see that the majority of people just ran straight past it. And that is a death sentence in a game like Left 4 Dead with fast-moving enemies, and it can quickly, completely ruin the vibe of a game that really relies on having such a fluid map. And again, this really shows how delicate game development truly is. Just one small detail being in the wrong place can throw a whole Kevin Spacey into your house of cards. But what about when playtesting is actually a bad thing? Well, after reading the comments on the last video, I think this is an interesting discussion that I would actually like to touch on. A lot of people actually didn't like playtesting, or at least the way Valve did it. They felt that doing things like removing the maze from the outlying caves was dumbing the game down for simpletons. I personally disagree. Not on principle, I just don't think mazes are difficult, they're just kind of annoying, and I don't really think many of the things on that list in the last video were about difficulty reduction. A lot of them were about trimming fat, and in one case, the Left 4 Dead 3 strikes and you're out rule, that was actually making the game more difficult, so I assume they just didn't watch the video, which is fine, I completely completely understand. Half-Life is not a difficult game. In my opinion, the only difficult game Valve has ever made is probably Counter-Strike, and that's because it's other people, and other people are famously good at making things difficult. But real talk, when the focus is atmosphere and a heavily scripted chase sequence, I don't really fancy being forced to navigate a maze. Even if the so-called maze the playtester found himself in was not in fact that complicated. For me, I hate mazes, as you fucking know, so maybe I'm just biased. But some of these guys were completely correct. Sometimes an over-reliance on playtesters and focus groups can completely take away the source of your game. The mojo, the animus. It can make it so much less special, and it can spell the end of your game before it even really starts. And yeah, any game that constantly bends itself to fit the shape of any focus group that comes through the door does not have a strong vision. It can easily become a very passive, unchallenging, kind of everything game, the kind that we're sick of seeing. I think the worst thing that can happen there is a complete full-blown identity crisis, which is far worse than even having broken mechanics at times. One example that you're probably really not expecting me of all people to talk about, yet is nevertheless fascinating, is The Sims. Now, The Sims got absolutely bodied, according to an article I found on Rock Paper Shotgun. Focus groups hated it. They didn't get it. They didn't care. And The Sims is just one of many games that almost never happened, or indeed didn't happen, because the bigwigs were like, well, if the focus groups don't like it, what makes you think there'll be a target audience for it? Now, don't get me wrong. At the time, The Sims was not this sprawling, endlessly creative, ambitious series. It was not super interactive, but it was on its way. And I'm not the biggest Sims fan, but I'd be pissed off if we lost it. And some industry professionals are really getting a bit dubious about the utility of these things. There is this ever-present balance, this battle and worry about, is my game going to be a visionary, one-of-a-kind project, or is it going to be a boring, sterile piece of shit that sells millions of copies? If you don't have a strong and determined enough vision, or if you are backed into a corner by worries about what playtesters and focus groups think, things can really hit the fan. An interesting insight from David Braben basically says that if you look at focus groups and playtesting as not necessarily focus groups, but simple testing, the same way you'd test a new medicine or a new car, then actually you'll feel pretty stupid if you don't do it. Of course, on some level it has to be done. It's always important to find issues in things that you intend to sell to people. You gotta make sure you know what those issues are if you can't fix them at least. If you know your audience, you should know the problems to look out for. And I just want to make it clear that I think this whole thing is pretty grey, no? I don't think we should dumb everything down, but I also don't think that we should be treating the customer like cattle. Apart from probably Valve, no company can sustain dumping millions and even billions into a project, not testing it enough, and then expecting to be a successful profit-seeking entity. Imagine if Valve would have missed obvious things like the Scout Car's motion sickness, or even the little details like the dropship taking it away. It's these small, charming moments that just make the game feel so much more alive. But yeah, you also can't change, for example, the way the game's physics work, because one guy tries to open the door with the inventory or something. And it's the role of the developer to have the vision and the expertise to know when to listen and when to say, get out of here. Or of course, you could just do a Hideo Kojima and make your game less fun on purpose. Thank you and good night.
A diamond so big in my inventory, pressing the key for my inventory, opening doors with my inventory. Where is the key for my inventory? I'm trying to collect, I'm trying to collect, I'm trying to collect, I'm trying to collect. Bitch, I'm the best, look how I finesse. I'm opening doors that Jim was in. I puked on the floor because I was stressed. My favorite ice cream is